Hi, I'm Pam Quyle for CCTV, here today with our Remarkable Persons of Calaveras County series. Our remarkable person for today is Paul Quyle, who also happens to be my father. Paul Quyle is well known here in Calaveras County for being remarkable because of all the many things that he's pursued, the different careers he's had, and all of his different interests. We'd like to start out today just with getting a little background on him. And so, Paul, if you'd let us know something about where you were raised and
yes,
what you've done.
I was really very fortunate in that I was raised in Stockton during the time that it was still a fairly small town. And this gave you the advantage of having somewhat of a rural upbringing as well as being in a city that was big enough to offer all of those things that you really wanted. So I felt that I was very fortunate in the area in which I lived.
Mm-hmm. And what your parents do?
Well, my dad was, I suppose, you could say that he had led a very adventurous life, Pam. He was a man who had done many things, but in my lifetime he was on the Stockton Police Department. He was a vice squad officer and detective sergeant.
Mm-hmm. And before that, he had lived in China?
Oh yes, he had grown up in the Midwest and had been a cowboy and a trapper. Went into the Army and served a period of time in the elite mounted scouts of the United States Army that was stationed in China before World War I.
Mm-hmm.
Then after the war, or during the war I should say, he came back and finished OCS and became an officer and served as an instructor and bayonet instructor until the end of the war. But then went into construction for several years and built several houses and large buildings in Stockton before he went on the police department.
Mm-hmm. So you were born in Stockton and raised there, but did you go to school in Stockton?
Well, for practical purposes, no, I didn't, Pam. You see, I actually had a very severe illness as a child, and so I wasn't in school from the first grade until the 8th grade. And that might have sounded like it might have been a handicap, but in reality, perhaps it gave me some advantages because I was forced to learn to read. If I wanted to amuse myself in all those years, I had to teach myself to read. And as a consequence, I started reading adult books and never really got into children's literature until I was an adult. So I sort of reversed the procedure.
Okay. But you did go to high school then?
Yes, yes. I was very fortunate in having one of the best group of high school instructors in the world. People who stimulated my interest, but even more important, were all highly skilled professional people.
Mm-hmm. And then I understand that you blacksmithed quite a few different trades while you were...
Oh, I was one of these stupid kids. I just loved school and I enjoyed learning. And summer vacations were a drag unless you could do something else. So, gee, I spent one summer apprenticed to a blacksmith in Stockton, not because I was going to earn money, but just because I wanted to do it. I spent another summer working with one of the last of the old Spanish saddle makers in Stockton, a man who taught me more about leathercraft and design than anyone could believe. And then I had the good fortune to work with other groups. I worked on construction, I worked punching cattle. I did all sorts of things, but it was always fun because each one of these people were people who could inspire you to want to do more.
Mm-hmm. Well, you went to UOP then after that?
Well, not just UOP. I mean, I went to what was then Stockton College, and I was going to be a veterinarian, and so I did all the pre-med work, all the science courses, spent a year of professional veterinary medicine, and then decided to change majors, which was perhaps a stupid thing, but it's something I look back on and feel was the right move. So instead of being a veterinarian, I ended up being a marine biologist. And at that time, UOP was opening up their new marine station, so I was the first student and spent 7 years being a marine biologist.
Oh.
But you know, that doesn't explain how I got to be in the present field.
No, it doesn't. So how did you get to be a pilot, Daddy?
Well, it was pretty much by accident. You see, where we lived in Stockton, we were on the river. And I used to enjoy walking along the river with my dog, and on this particular day, I climbed out on a limb and made the mistake of falling off and into the mud below. Well, gee, I was covered with mud from head to foot. So I started walking home and scraping this muck off of me, you know, and I had it in my hand, and what can you do with something in your hand except push your thumb into it and make a little pot? So that really inspired me. I wanted to do more, and by accident that piece got fired in a bonfire, and I was so intrigued by it, I just had to go back and collect more mud, and I started. So all the years I was going to be a science major, I was also playing in clay. But those were the days before there were any school classes. There were no books in the library. The professional potters had locked doors because it was all a secret and they wouldn't let you in. And so you really had to scramble in order to get information in this field. Mm-hmm. But it was a challenge. Once somebody says, no, you can't do it, that means I just have to do it.
That sounds about right. Okay, so you're taking art classes, but you finished a degree in science. Then I know that you came back to Stockton after Dillon Beach and after your university years, and you were teaching school in Stockton, and you met my mom there. But what were you teaching?
We had a variety of things. I was officially in the high school as an art teacher, but at the same time, they desperately needed art teachers at the junior college, and I was teaching leathercraft and pottery. In fact, I was one of the first of the ceramic instructors at Delta College. And this was strictly night adult education programs, but at the same time I was working at UOP in the art department, and I was also teaching pottery and general crafts for teachers there. Mm-hmm. So later I did a little stint of art supervising for Stockton schools, or assistant supervisor, before my wife and I decided that we were just going to give up teaching entirely, forget the grief, forget the politics, and move to the mountains where we had an offer of the ranch that we have now, and here we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, how did you get into making clay, which is of course what we do now?
Oh, well, we wouldn't believe the difficulty of finding materials when art was new, or when ceramics was new in the area. There were no sources of clay, and the only people who would supply clay were some of the big commercial plants. And they would put it in old gunny sacks, and we were having trouble with rice sprouting in the pots we made, or wheat growing a beard in the pot while it was still damp. And we needed clay, so I started out to prospect for clays, to look for them, started formulating a clay body that we could use at home and for my own students, because my students desperately needed clay. And as soon as I started doing that, why, Arts and Crafts in Oakland phoned, hey, look, couldn't you make a little bit of extra for us because we need it too? And then Mills College came along and said, we need clay. And then Sacramento State opened a ceramic department and they need clay. The next thing we knew, we were running an 8 to 10 hour a day business while we were trying to teach too. Mm-hmm. And it was just too much. So we decided, throw up the tenure, get rid of the teaching, let's become full-time potters. Mm-hmm. And that's where we've been for the last 40 years.
Yeah. Well, you moved up here with 2 daughters, and I was born up here. But your folks were up here too, weren't they?
Yeah, my dad had retired from the police department by then, and he built the house that we're living in now for a retirement house. But when he discovered that the city fathers in Stockton wouldn't allow us to build or do anything at all, even though we were on a piece of ground that was zoned for industry and all that, why, he said, look, forget it, come up here, you can have the house and have the ranch. And he built another house for himself. So that's how I got up here. Mm-hmm. And it's a move that we have never regretted. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, Calaveras County is one of the greatest places in the world. It's stupid to be here, you understand.
Well,
because we mine our clay in the lower end of the county, we haul it up to here, we process it, and then we haul it back past the clay pits to get to our customers.
Right, it's a little extra trucking, but you get to live where you want to be.
Right.
Which I appreciate
too. And you get
too.
to enjoy the people here.
Right. So at this point, with your Quyle Kilns, your son-in-law Stuart's running the clay end of the business. So essentially, you aren't much involved in that business anymore, except as a management end, and so this is leaving you time to pursue some of your other interests.
Yes, it really is. All my life, Pam, I've been very, very fortunate in my family. I've had encouragement from my father and my mother and all of my family. I've had the most wonderful wife in the world and daughters who would let me develop interests and would let me pursue them, because when I start something, I just have to go whole hog. I have to work at it, read everything I can get my hands on, talk to people. I have to really go into it in depth, or I don't want to do it at all. Mm-hmm.
So how did you get involved in printing and buying printing presses?
Oh, gee, Pam, when we first started up here, we wanted tags to put on our clay. And we started with rubber stamps, and we stamped our name on it and then tried to put some information on. By the time you've stamped 10,000 little tags and tied them on bags of clay, you want a better method of doing it. So I invested in a small printing press that a friend had as surplus equipment, and they didn't know how to use it, but they had it. Mm-hmm. And so I brought it home and started to print tags, but it was so unsatisfactory, it would look worse than rubber stamps. And to have a printing press that isn't working is just a challenge. And I discovered very, very early in this life that if you really want to learn something, go to those people who are the experts. Don't just go to anybody. Find out who is the best. And I went to the Bay Area and found out who was considered to be California's finest printers and just knocked on the door and said, hey, I'm interested in printing. I'd like to learn something about it. And you know, these people who are the world's greatest are dying for somebody to come in and share their knowledge. They want to. They're isolated. They don't understand. They're so far above everyone else that they are lonesome. And they'll do almost anything for you if you just take the time and trouble to go ask. And then do it. Don't ask them if you're not going to do it. Mm-hmm. But when they show you how to do something, go home and try it and do it. So I went home and I tried what they told me, and it worked. And I became more and more interested, and I started looking for other equipment, and they told me where things were available. And I was lucky, because in those days, letterpress was going out. There was equipment being given away. I could have had a whole newspaper plant if I just hauled it away. But all I wanted, of course, was letterpress. So I started collecting presses, and I started collecting type, and I started collecting information. And then I found a wonderful group of people, Pam. This group of people is called the Moxon Chapel. And they're a group of not just amateur printers, but they're a group of highly skilled professionals and amateurs that blend together into a wonderful group. And I've been meeting with them now almost 30 years. We've been there every single month for 30 years and have enjoyed each other. But as a consequence, they keep criticizing what you're doing, trying to improve standards, talking about design, talking about history, talking about the aesthetics of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And these people are rather unique, actually, in the world today, because everything they print, a sample of all of the printing that we do, even if it's just a business card, goes into the permanent library collection of the Bancroft Library at the University of California, and the Bender Room at Stanford University, and the Huntington Library, and Oxford Library, the Bodleian Library there, all collect our work.
So everything you've printed is stored in libraries.
Someplace in the library. Nice. And you know what it does to your ego to be able to go into a great library, one of the great libraries of the world, and have a box over here with your name on it? And in a matter of fact, just on the other side of the room was a box that had an original Gutenberg. You know, so we're in good company.
Yeah,
it's real fun.
Sounds like it.
But at the present time, I've got more printing equipment than good sense. Why, we've got, at the last count, we have 27 major pieces of printing equipment. Linotypes, pivotal casters, monotypes, strip casters, printing presses.
I know, I dusted.
I know, you don't. Okay, does that answer your question about
I think so.
printing?
Well, what are you doing at this point with your printing?
We have a policy, as you well know, because you grew up printing. Mm-hmm. I think all of my girls grew up printing, and they started printing when they were 6 and 7 years old.
Yes.
They probably have run more 1,000 impressions than they like to remember.
Tags.
But nevertheless, you know, we have never taken a job that would normally go to a professional printer. Our thought is, this isn't how we make our money, so we will not do jobs for money, but we will occasionally do a volunteer job. So I've done things for Friends of the Library, I've done things for the Girl Scouts, I've done things for AFS, but we just normally restrict ourselves to doing small books or historical things that would not otherwise be printed.
Mm-hmm. Would you go ahead and take us into the print shop and show us the press or how to set some type or something like that?
Oh, I'd love to, Pam. You know me. I'd much rather be doing something than just sitting
Sounds
here.
Sounds like a good idea. Me too.
Why don't we go over there? Okay, Pam, I think perhaps the easiest thing would be to do one of the strikers we use on our triangles. So for this, we're just going to use a little piece of 3/4 inch square stock, put it here in the forge, get it hot, and then we'll go from there. First operation is going to be to fuller it. We're going to neck it down where it's going to be drawn out. And to do this, we'll use this foot-powered impact hammer. The foot hammer is known in Europe as an Oliver. I don't know how it came to have that term, but it's certainly a saving device. In the old days, a blacksmith would have a striker to help him. But today we don't have the apprentices and we don't have the helpers, so we have to improvise. And this gives you a free hand, because unfortunately a blacksmith needs 3 hands. You need to hold the metal, hold the hammer, and strike at the same time. So this gives us an out. We're just straightening things up here. And we, of course, have to reheat frequently, because if the metal is not kept hot, it just does not move. The temperatures we're working with are about 15 to 1600 degrees. And at that point, iron moves fairly freely. Now we're about to use this power hammer. This is a high-speed operation. This small hammer strikes with a very, very severe force, and it can be varied in speed anywhere from almost imperceptible to 300 strokes a minute. Each one of these blows is the equivalent of a strong man swinging a sledgehammer with all of his might. And we use the power hammer to draw down or to move metal instead of doing it all by hand on the anvil. All right, Pam, now that we have drawn this out on the power hammer, we're going to finish up the taper by hand. This is just a little finishing thing here just to bring it down. We don't want it to remain square, but we're going to knock the edges and the corners off and more or less bring it into a somewhat rounded form. This is almost as far as we will go with the taper. And the next part of the operation will be to bend this into the hook form that we want. Of course, we're going to put a twist on the square in just a moment, so perhaps I was getting ahead of myself there just a little bit. So now we'll go over to the vise and lock it in the blacksmith's vise. This is an old tool, by the way, that you have difficulty finding a good blacksmith's vise anymore. But we'll give it a couple of twists which have no purpose other than decoration. This is just a decorative situation here, and makes it look a little bit more attractive. You'll note how easy it was to bend that iron by hand, but we'll go back over here and we'll very quickly straighten that out on the anvil with just a few simple gentle blows. Okay, Pam, we're going to start the twist or the bend at the end of this piece, and you can see that this is done very much on the edge of the anvil to start the bend, and then we continue bending across here. And it's a pretty simple, straightforward operation. You know, you have the horn of the anvil, and you have the ability to just about control any curve or any shape that you really want. This is a vertical stake that we have made here at the shop. It is just not quite as big around as the horn of the anvil, and it enables you to work and see what you're doing just with a little bit more facility. You could use the horn of the anvil, but this vertical stake helps visually, perhaps more than anything else. Now we're just about through a little bit of wire brushing on that, and that's just about the finished piece that will be used with one of our triangles for calling people to dinner or whatever they want. Okay, Pam, here in the print shop we're operating on a little bit different principle. As you well know, type comes as individual pieces, and they are being fitted together in what the printer calls a stick. Now this is a mirror image of what you're actually going to see, so the printer has to learn to read as a mirror image. It's a pretty easy thing, but it does take a little bit of practice. Once we get the type set and have it in the stick and have justified it by using small spaces between the letters or at the end to bring the lines out even where we want them to be, then this will be locked up in a chase, and it will go in the press to actually be printed. So at this stage we have just 2 lines set in the stick, and we're ready to go from here and lock it up and put it in the press. I'm working here on a very old Chandler and Price press. This press probably goes back to the turn of the century. I don't know how many millions of impressions it has made, but it's still a very, very fine press and one that I enjoy using. This is a hand-fed press. We should distinguish between a hand-fed press and a hand press. A hand press is one such as Franklin would have used, where you had a flat platen that moved in under the press, and you had a screw mechanism which put on the pressure. So this is a mechanical press. It is motor driven, but it is hand fed. Now this might seem at first to be rather time-consuming, monotonous, this type of thing, but in reality it's rather fun. You're picking up the paper, you're dropping it, putting it in place, you're making an impression, you're watching the ink and the quality of the ink that's going on, and it's sort of a relaxing operation. And we have probably fed many hundreds of thousands of sheets through this press over the last few years. This is still my first love. This is something that I've been doing since I was a very young teenager. I enjoy working with clay. I love the feel of the response of the material under my hands. The potter's wheel is probably the first machine that man has ever invented, and archaeologists tell us that the potter's wheel goes back to some 4000 BC. And in the 6,000 years that man has been using a potter's wheel, he has explored hundreds and hundreds of different shapes. There's probably nothing that could be done today which is truly original because someone has done it before you. But nevertheless, as you work, as you feel this responsive material, you sort of fail to remember that it's really just dirt. But it has been refined, worked, wedged, and finally you put it on the potter's wheel and you discover that here you have a material that is totally plastic, that responds to your every touch. It looks so effortless when you do it, but then again, playing the piano looks so effortless. But you know, there's actually years of experience go into being able to use the potter's wheel, to control it, to make it do what you want. No matter how simple it may be as a piece of a mechanism, it still challenges you, and it challenges you every single time you sit down to use it. The pot is really an extension of yourself. It's something that you put part of your own soul into, in a sense. It reflects your personality. Just simple mud, but when it's all done, you have something that's enduring beauty that will last virtually forever unless someone drops it or breaks it.
So we know that you've been working with pottery and clay and blacksmithing and printing, and that seems like a lot, but what else have you been doing? I'm sure there's something else.
Well, actually, Pam, over the years, both my wife and I have always felt that if you're going to be in a community, it's very important that you contribute to that community. And so over the years, I have tried to do some civic things. I was served on the school board in the county. I served as chairman of the Friends of the Library. I was active with the Republican Central Committee. And of course, for years, I've been very, very active as far as a church worker is concerned. We started a church here on our own property years and years ago, and finally were able to procure land and to build a church in Murphy's. And over the years, I have served as an associate minister there, filling in whenever it was necessary. But at the present time, I find not only the church work, but I'm, as you well know, active in the Calaveras Mining Association.
Mm-hmm.
And I am active in the Murphy's Business Association. And I told you, of course, that I was interested in printing and belonged to the Moxon Chapel. But I also have a few other things that are of interest to me as far as civic organizations are concerned. I'm currently serving as an alternate for the County Hazardous Waste Advisory Board. And so all of these things are things that you put in time but aren't going to get any rewards other than the feeling that you have done something for the community.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, at times it can be almost a thankless task, but you still have the satisfaction of knowing that you've done something. And to me, that's important.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Paul Quyle, for being here and being our guest on Calaveras Community Television's show, Remarkable People of Calaveras County.
It was my pleasure.
Thanks. And I'm Pam Quyle for CCTV, and we hope that you enjoyed the show and that you'll be with us for our next series. Thanks. Bye.